this is rendering. So a full log application, static log application for the screencast, and we will go about some basic Racket stuff to do this. The first thing we want to do, this is Dr. Racket, if you're not familiar. We want to change the language from Racket to Web Server Insta. This basically has all the libraries and functions that we will be using. One of the big functions we do use is the start function, which is our main function for any web application. So let's go ahead and define a start function. Now, the start function does take a parameter, and it takes a request parameter. What the request parameter actually is, it's when a browser opens your URL, let's say, it sends a request to your application saying, hey, applications, give me back something to show. And this request is what's being passed in to the start. Initially, it may not have anything in it, but like if we do have forms or other sorts of inputs from the user, this may contain bindings and stuff, which we'll see later on, probably in the second screencast. So let's move on. So we have a start request. I will create a response to it, but my response has to be in the format of actual HTML. It cannot be in Racket format. So to convert between these two, we have a response expression. If you're confused about X expressions, do go over the required reading. It will clear up a lot of the doubts. So, and we have now we can have Racket HTML syntax. So let's have a simple HTML right now, nothing too fancy. Let's give it a head tag, let's give it a title, my first application, that's too long, let's just give it my blog, and then let's give it a body with a header tag of my blog as well. As you notice, you don't need the X expression and like you don't need the head, the title, the header tags, the body tags, any of those to be in quotes, because the X expression understands those by within itself. So let's clear off, make sure I have my parentheses. Here we go. This is our first basic application, nothing fancy. Let's run this. As we run this, you see it does tell you where it is. It should open up your default browser, which I am waiting for it to open up. And there you go. That's all it is. If you want to see, let's inspect this and see we're on the right page and we have the right stuff. Yeah, title, my blog, nothing fancy going on. All right, let's go back to Racket and do something more cool with this. So I want to start actually building my basic blog, and the first thing I want to do is create a post. So we will define a structure for the post, and how we do that, and it's fairly similar to other languages. You have a struct function, you give it a name, and it struct function, it will take two things, a title and have a body, and that's it. You've defined it. It has post object, has a title and a body. That's the best way to think about it. So now we have our post and we know how to render HTML. Make sure you're comfortable with this type of formatting. There's a lot of reading questions you might want to go over. The reading has a lot of other examples. So once you're comfortable with that, I will now go ahead and create a render post function. I want to basically list all the posts that I will have in the block. We're assuming that there's multiple. We don't have a database yet, but even if it's static, there will be multiple post objects. We want to list all of them. So I will define a function called render as a list, render as an itemized list. And I will give it a parameter called fragments. So what we're basically trying to do here is this function will basically have generate an unordered list and have a lot of list items in it. That's what we're trying to do. So we have our UL unordered list tag, and now we're going to use the comma add expression. What this does is it helps us. We're slicing a list of expression into a larger template. So like we have this is all Rackets, right? And then and we started our expression format here, but we want to splice it here and say, oh, whatever comes after this is Racket again, but evaluate that eventually into an X expression so we can return an X expression to this function. So that's all it's doing. It's saying stop the X expression here, we're splicing it, and then everything after that evaluate it and give me back an X expression. And then we have our simple Racket syntax. So we have a map function to basically another function call, and we will define that function in a second. Render as item. So we're in the list function, but we're calling a map function eventually to list all of the stuff. So we're going to pass in the same parameter we had. And so what does the render as item do? Well, nothing really fancy. It just generates an X expression for the list item. I'm gonna give it actually, let's go to fragment. I'll give it one fragment. And yeah, so all it does is generates a list item, and now again you're evaluating it. So you have the comma. So anytime you want to evaluate, right? So I have to make this clear. There's a difference between the comma at and just the comma. The comma is when you just want to evaluate one expression. There's you have one Racket thing, you just want to get the X expression out of it. There you go. You can simply use the comma like we will do here, and I will just put fragment, and we are done with this function. But if what the add expression really does is it helps us to fragment stuff into a larger template. So basically, it's sort of like a list all. So this, if you just had a comma here, that would just give you something nasty and try and just evaluate this function as it is, not whatever the function is outputting. However, if you have the at, you're going inside and saying, hey, whatever you return, I want that to be a template for this UL. It's a little tricky to understand, but basically, you're just creating a list all function with these two. So in our start somewhere, we will call render as items list eventually. All right. So I'm going to move on. So these two functions list all the blocks. So next thing we want to do is let's create some posts. So we have something to show, and let's call this function Oh, actually, before that, I want to actually create our block. So it's going to be static block. So let's create that static blog. Let's call it capital blog list post. Now this post is the same structure we defined up top here. Um, and we know it's the structure says we have a title in the body, so let's have a title. This is my first post, and then we also have what the post is. Yay, I'm making a post. And then we finished. Well, let's have another post. This is my second post. This is so cool. And let's finish off the blog. So we've just defined a blog, which is nothing. Block can be treated as another struct, and eventually we will, and probably in screencast too. But currently we have static, so we can just define blog as just a list of posts here. Right. We want to change our start to show the blog. So I'm gonna, my blog's fine, but however, I'm just gonna add in the body tag, I'm gonna evaluate render post, and actually let's clean this up a bit. That would work, but let's clean this up. So I actually will have just one simple call here, render blog page, where we pass it in our static block that we just put up here. This we just made up here in here, and the request. And now let's define what the render blog page would do. The render blog page, got that. So it'll take a blog, right, as a parameter, like we just defined it here, and it will take a request, and it will create an X expression, right, because we don't have that here. It has to be somewhere. Response xexpr html head title my blog, finish off the head, body, let's do an h1, my blog. Now inside the body tag, we will evaluate, we're basically going to render all posts. So I will create render posts here, our blog. So render post just takes in a blog. It's going to find what the posts are inside it and render it. So we will see how that happens. Let me finish this off. So let's write that function here. Takes a blog. Oops, forgot that. So how does render a post basically do? Well, you can there's a lot of freedom here. You can, if you wanted to have a div, you can have a div which for each post for some styling later on, and we will do that. So let's create a div with class post, and let's basically post actually let's do another helper function to make life easier. The reason why I'm gonna have a lot of helper functions, because in Racket usually having one really long lengthy function, it gets really complicated to read and understand. So I try and tend to divide up a lot of the work between functions, and that's basically what's going to happen. I'm gonna render post will basically give me a map of render post, and I'll give it a block. Um, so I could have not had this function, or as a matter of fact, any of these helper functions. It could all be just inside the start. It's a lot easier to read. So I pass it in the blog, finish that off, and let's define render post now. Um, and render post actually, whoa, I don't want it. I'll give it. All right, so you already did. Okay, so I'll give it a post object, and we basically want to show it. And our post object looks like this. Remember the struct on top. So let's create another div, and this time we'll call it a post. It's a class because we'll have multiple of these, right? We're calling a map function, just it's going to render a list. So we know, like I just said, right? I just gave it away. We're going to have a list in here. Or let's just evaluate the post title post, and then this post title is going to be on top, and then inside that we can have our post body, and that's it. There's nothing really fancy anymore. That's gonna render all that we need. So if you're wondering how this worked, the post struct that was defined before has a title and a body, and by doing so we access those elements. Same with so let's try and run this and see if we do see our post. Oops. So you have to stop and restart our server. Let's see if that worked. No, it didn't. Let's try and debug and see what happened. So render post. Alright, so I think I know what's wrong. I made a stupid mistake. I'm not using the right symbol. I'm using an apostrophe. We're not. We're supposed to use. It's called the grave accent. It's the key right below your escape key. New mistake. Did that before as well. So I think if we change all of that, it won't be that stupid at all. Also, we're not using these right now, but we will. The point of these was to illustrate that this is how you would do list items, and we're not doing list items just yet. We're just doing basic div classes, but I'm gonna comment these out for now. Actually, that's not how you comment. I'm just gonna delete them. We're not using them. So, right, let's give this another shot. Server running. Server open. Look what it is. That's our page. There's our blogs, posts. Let's inspect this and see. We have our classes. We have our head, title. That's good. We have a H1. Here we go. We have a class called post, and then we have individual post class inside it. You can play around a lot with the styling. Like if you didn't And that's really helpful because since we split it all up, it's so easy now. I want to change what our posts look like. Uh, I just simply can add an h1 tag here and change that part and make it more distinguishable. You can also add CSS files, but let's carry on and go ahead and actually do some more awesome stuff. Uh, so what the next thing we want to do is really figure out how do we play with the request parameter. Um, Currently we're not dealing with it much. I mean, we get it here, we pass it in to render block, but we don't ever use it anywhere. And if you're wondering why we haven't, it's just because we're displaying something really static, and um, there's no real need for it. So I'm going to create some other helper functions and then try and show you uh, uh, what we will actually do with the request parameter. So let's go ahead and create those functions. We have a define parse post function. So this is where we will figure out if sort of like error checking in a way. This is a Boolean function. You can guess with the question mark at the end. And we will pass in it bindings. So the request parameter comes in with bindings, whether they're empty or they're full. They have these associated bindings to it. And let's test if we want to give an output of true if there's both bindings, the title binding and the body binding. What we're basically attempting to do, let me back up. Maybe I jumped the gun here. So we are trying to create now an input on the block. I jumped that part. I'm sorry. We're trying to create input form, and it's a simple HTML form with a couple of inputs. And when we want to click that, we want the user to be able to make his own block on the page, make his own post on the page. So before, let me start changing it here and make life a lot simpler. So we render our blog post. Let's add a form with inputs. Let's have a title for post for the form. I mean, this structure should be similar to our post because that's essentially what we don't want to create. We will also have, however, a submit here. Let's close that out. Let's bring back my parentheses. All right, so and now we want, so every time the submit is clicked, what actually happens is whatever's in these two text objects will bind themselves to the request object that's generated. We need to handle that request object and create a post or render a post based on that. We're not actually saving it to the database right now, but we actually want to see it, right? So I will now the render post and the post function stay the same, but what we really need to change is figure out how do we handle this rendering, right? So we want to have firstly check if the request has these bindings, because requests are now generated in two forms. Initially, when you load an application, you send a request, but when you click the submit, you will also generate a request, right? And let's see, just to show you what submit I'm talking about. I had an error. Oh, I think it's just confused because I don't have handling. No, there's actually an error. Okay. Why are you not happy? I created a form. Alright, I think we need to handle it. Otherwise, Racket wouldn't let me go ahead. Let's handle it first, and then I'll make it clear. So, as I was saying, we need to figure out we basically need to we need to parse this whatever comes into this request title in the body, and figure out how do we create it. So let's define a parse. You're basically parsing the post, right? So let's create a parse post with a binding as a parameter, and what this basically will do is it'll take the bindings and it'll give out you. It'll create a post for you. So you will create a post and extract binding. Extract binding is another useful function that will help us get stuff out of the request parameter. Title bindings. This basically says I'm looking for a single binding, not the whole lot. What binding I'm looking for is the title binding, and it's in the bindings parameter. Remember, our post struct takes title and a body, so I will do the same thing for the body. And we pass it in bindings. But you know, when we run this, I'm pretty sure we will still get an error based off of this fact. And the reason is, we're not really checking to make sure. Like I said, there's two types of requests. One request will be generated with no bindings when you initially, well, they'll have like default binding. It'll be generated when you initialize your application, when you go to the browser the first time, right, to render the basic output. Second will be generated when we click that submit, and both going to the same place, which can be problematic, and we'll figure out how to deal with that. But currently, we want to first check before we call the parse post functions that in fact it was the submit button that was pushed. In fact, these bindings do exist. So I'm just going to have a Boolean function to help me do that. If I can parse the post with the bindings param, and then I have an and exists binding. These are again just simple library calls that come from the web server packet that we had initially up here. Right, so we want both, so exists binding body bindings, and so this will basically check to make sure we're on the right track. So but we haven't really called these functions anymore, and that's going to happen in our start request. We have to change stuff here, and I'm not going to explain the whole function. It's a little messy. So the local is currently where we are. That could replace itself with the database as well. So we will create I won't create a helper for this. We will define a blog within this. I mean, there's multiple ways of this, and in this definition of a blog, we need to have a condition, right? And our condition will be can parse post, and we will pass it in a request binding. So we're basically trying to get the bindings from our request parameter and pass that in. So request bindings takes the request which is generated, and we pass in the request binding, so we get our binding, a list of bindings basically, and we pass that in here to this function we defined. So, and if that returns true, we basically create a cons of posts. So we first check it, and then if it's true, we pass the bindings in. Hey, to create, basically saying, hey, post function, create that post that I asked for. So we parse the post, here's the parse FOCS function we just made, and it will create that for us, and we want to return a const of that along with our current blog. Um, so we're basically attaching our new post to our old blog that we defined here. If that returns true, we close that off, and let's close it off as well. I gotta make sure, right? But what happens if it's not true, right? So let's have an else. Would be simply just return what we had before. I mean, it's not, we don't have to handle anything. It's not the right type of request. So we close that off and close our local here, and that should do it. We've handled it. And let me make sure I'm not forgetting something. So oh, yeah, stupid error. Let's run it again. I have a problem with spellings apparently. And there, let's see what we get. Ooh, okay. We definitely have a problem. What am I doing wrong here? Alright, so I figured out what I was doing wrong. Yeah. So, syntax error. This input is not a list or takes multiple stuff. You have to define it every time. That was my bad. Some HTML stuff. Make sure my parentheses are all okay. I think I have an extra one. There we go. Yeah, and also I have to pass in. I changed this from a blog to a blog to blog just for name consistency, and that's the one that's being passed now. This is the stuff we define. Make sure you pass this in, not the capital blog we were, because now we may have this new attachment to it. Let's run it. There we go. No error this time. Ta-da. So you see the ones that we had before are still there. Now we have see these two fields. Let's see what happens. This is my third post. Hope this works. And I can submit that query, and there it is. There's still a couple of errors with this. So let's then try and post another one. What happens? It replaces the same one, right? And why that's happening is because you have that console stuff going on. And so let's try and fix that. And how we will do that is using why that's happening is because, like I said, we have two requests and they're both going to the start function. We want to, if we separate those out, and we will be able to solve this problem. And how we do that is we use the function send suspend dispatch function that helps us actually guide which request goes to what URL. So I will change a couple of things here in this form. The first thing we want to change is create an action, same as an HTML action, and this action will call a make URL function, and we will pass it in a handler. So insert post handler. We're going to close the action off. So we're gonna so the action's gonna have this method URL to it. And we also want to change actually. Right, and we want to also change the way we interact with this overall. So I'm gonna actually, all right, this will, okay, this will be cleaner. So we have to add a local, again, define a response generator, which takes a URL, which takes a function basically, which as you can see we're calling here. And all these guys stay the same. Make sure I close it off. Right, and so we haven't really defined this. Don't want to use a helper for it. I'll just define. So what the insert post handler is really doing, it's gonna tell it. It's gonna be what like we had before. It's actually gonna be the same. This con stuff that's really going on will be handled in here now. So we called a specific function instead of the whole request like before. Right. And I'm actually gonna copy. Actually, I'll just write it down. Render. Here's another blog page. Cons parse. Request bindings. Pass it in the request. Give it the blog and attach it to the request and close off local. Before we end the function, this is where we call the census. I will go over what's really going on in a second. Let me just get all of this in. Response generator. Alright, so what we basically did was encapsulated all of the stuff we were doing before in this response generator function that takes a function that will create a URL, right? So everything's fine and dandy, except we attach this action and we call the make URL saying, hey, insert a post handle, inserts so in HTML the action usually takes form of basically a file name or a function call that will basically trigger when the submit is clicked for that form. And we're trying to create, so we basically trying to remove stuff from our general request and put it in this function call. And so we define that towards the end. We render our simple call this render block page function, and it generally, so we have the same parse post, and we know we don't have to ever check this time because we it's only called when the submit is clicked, and we basically attach that, parse the post, attach to a blog, render it. That's all this insert stuff does. And this is the function that if you miss out will give you lots of errors. The send, suspend, dispatch towards the end calls this generator function, And that's it. Hopefully, if I didn't make any of the stupid errors, this should work out to be. Oh, I forgot to remove the stuff from here. So, bye bye, all of that. We're back to handling one request for a start. Life should be good. Oh, capital blog again because this is the static version. All right, let's run this. So hopefully no errors. Insert post handler spelling error. Response. See, I can't really spell generator. There we go. Let's see what happens. Ta-da! It works. Let's see what happens. We don't have that problem anymore. Just because our requests are handled separately. So, you've created a basic blog application. I'm not gonna go any further with this. You can follow the reading and go along with sharing and adding comments and for playing around with this more.